Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Venus Medicine Research Center. There's a warm welcome to all our speakers and the audience for being present in today's webinar, Soup to Nuts of Antibiotic Breakpoints. This webinar is a sincere effort to bridge the gap between the microbiological perception and the clinical outlook towards antibiotic sensitivity testing and breakpoints. Before we move forward to the session, let me introduce myself to you. I'm Dr. Pankaj Mandale, acting as a Senior Director Medical Affairs for Venus Medicine Research Center. I will be your host and the moderator for today's webinar session. After my welcome speech, the session will be handed to our CEO of VMRC, Mr. Saransh Chaudhary, who will share his views on VMRC, then followed by the session topics by Dr. Camilla Rodriguez.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of VMRC, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on soup to nuts of antibiotic breakpoints. For those of you who are not familiar with Venus Medicine Research Center or VMRC, please allow me to give a brief introduction. VMRC is the research wing of Venus Remedies Limited and was set up in 2004 with the aim to find innovative solutions to the challenge of AMR. Since our inception, we have worked on a multitude of approaches, including BL-BLI combinations, antibiotic resistance breakers, novel drug delivery techniques, and novel formulation techniques with the singular aim of addressing the unmet medical need of AMR. With a state-of-the-art research facility, VMRC was among the first in India to be accredited by DSIR, obtained GLP accreditations for multiple preclinical labs, and a CPSCA-approved animal house. Over the years, we have added super specialty labs to advance our understanding of bacterial infectious diseases like hollow fiber infection models and, for the first time in India, organ-in-chip models. We have always viewed AMR as a huge public health crisis that needs to be dealt with on an immediate basis and at all levels of the healthcare setup. And the concept of antibiotic breakpoints is critical for the appropriate use of antibiotics in clinical settings. Yet, this remains a highly complex area due to the ever-evolving scientific and regulatory landscape. The content for this webinar was drafted and curated by an expert panel to provide you with a thorough understanding of how to establish and interpret antibiotic breakpoints. Before I leave, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, all the doctors, the healthcare workers, paramedics, and all support staff who have worked tirelessly over the past year and given their all in the fight against COVID-19. Please accept my heartfelt gratitude. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Pankaj Mandale to initiate the proceedings for the webinar. Thank you all.
So let's go ahead to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Dr. Aruna Pujari ma'am. She is a consultant microbiologist and the head of the department of British Candy Hospital, Mumbai. She is like a strong pillar in the microbiological fraternity. She has numerous awards under her belt. She has received the National Award for Hand Hygiene Innovation Award. She has also been awarded at the HISICON as well as the annual Maharashtra chapter conferences. She's also a top ranker in her academic days, and she has authored more than 27 national and international publications. The beauty is that she is also interested in the area of specialization she has is in clinical microbiology, infectious disease, hospital infection control, and laboratory management. So towards you, ma'am, for the session. Thank you for being here today. Your PPT is already visible for us. Kindly unmute.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pankaj, for that kind introduction. Good afternoon to Dr. Rahul, Dr. Camilla Rodriguez, and all the delegates who have joined this particular event. And at the outset, I'd like to thank Venus Remedies for giving me an opportunity to be here and discussing an important topic, which is both important to microbiologists as well as to our clinical team members. So the topic that I was given to discuss today was clinical relevance of breakpoints, and I'm happy that Dr. Rahul has already laid down the background for the basics of this particular topic that I'm going to be taking up. So, okay. How does the slide move ahead? Dr. Pankaj, can you help me with how the slide moves ahead? The next slide. Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, got it. So basically, this is a very good paper from 2007 by John Turnridge and David Patterson, which mentioned about breakpoints being an integral part to modern microbiology laboratory practice. And I agree completely. For the last almost 10 years, most of us microbiologists have been reporting breakpoints, if not to every antibiotic or drug bug combination, but certainly to the important ones that we come across on a routine basis. These are basically discriminatory antimicrobial concentrations that would help us interpret drug susceptibility tests, define them into whether they are susceptible or resistant based upon the interpretive criteria that is already been given by the two organizations. Dr. Rahul also discussed CLSI as well as UCAST, and its expression is completely based upon what testing methodology that we use. So if it is the minimum inhibitory concentration method, it's either milligrams per liter or micrograms per mil. And for zone diameters, it is in millimeters. We normally do not go about reporting zone diameters, but certainly we go about reporting the MIC value. So this is what a report basically could look like. You could have zone diameter based reporting over here, where interpretations are given as sensitive, intermediate, resistance, SDD, and so on. Whereas you could have a report wherein your interpretation is given along with some MIC values which are important based upon the CLSI or UCAS breakpoints, whichever your laboratory or your hospital adopts. But do not accept reports where you have interpretation of sensitivity in pluses and 1+ and 2+ and 3+, because that's really not the standardized method. And this kind of a report really does not require you to waste your time trying to understand it. Please put it in the dustbin. So you could have a zone diameter based interpretation, or you could have an MIC based interpretation with MIC values being present. So Dr. Rahul already mentioned about CLSI and UCAST giving us clinical breakpoints, and these clinical breakpoints take into account the MICs and zone diameters of the organisms. He already laid down how they really do that. It also looks into PKPD data and looks into clinical studies to correlate the response with microbiology eradication. And based on that, it gives us these interpretations of susceptible, intermediate, susceptible, dose dependent, resistance, and so on and so forth. If only the comparison of MICs or zone diameters is to be taken of microorganisms without any clinical correlation of PKPD data, it certainly falls into what is called as the ECOF or the ECV for CLSI, where you cannot interpret them as susceptible or resistant, but you can certainly put them as wild type or non-wild type, is what both CLSI as well as UCAST recommend if you are reporting an antibiotic to a bug combination based on ECVs or ECOFs. Now, these are the important questions I thought that we need to answer for today's session. How important is reporting MIC values? Where all should we be reporting MIC values? It's not that you need to do it completely for each and every drug and bug combination. Can drug doses be really changed on MICs based on MICs to optimize patient outcomes? And how does one choose the best antibiotic from a DST report? And each of these we will be taking. I'll be taking in the subsequent slides. So let's take on how important is reporting MIC values. Now, this is a study that looked at, it's a systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at actually the impact of antibiotic MICs on infection outcomes in patients with susceptible gram-negative bacteria. So meaning that this is a study which includes other studies where they have taken into consideration all MICs of different drug and bug combinations which are below the susceptible breakpoint. Okay, and their main conclusions were that whether it is from the point of view of mortality or treatment outcomes, when they actually divided these susceptible strains into low MIC and high MIC, they found that with Salmonella, as well as with non-fermenting gram-negative bacilli, the likely chances of treatment failure is more when it comes to MICs which are closer to your susceptible breakpoint, meaning susceptible but higher MICs. And same with the mortality, particularly non-fermenting gram-negative bacilli. They found that if you have higher susceptible MICs, then the likely chances of mortality were high. Now, which are these non-fermenting gram-negative bacilli? It's basically Pseudomonas, Burkholderia cepacia, Acinetobacter, Stenotrophomonas maltophilia, common organisms that we encounter as healthcare associated infections in critical settings and in patients who are could be immunocompromised on multiple drugs. And often these pathogens are either MDR or XDR bugs. So that makes it important from the point of view of understanding why in certain situations and certain drug and drug combinations you really need an MIC to be there. Now again, I want to explain this to you. So if you have a drug A and some organism along which this particular drug A, the entire range of MICs have been reported, and if 1 is considered as a susceptible breakpoint and 4 as the resistant breakpoint, this particular study said that if the MIC, so all of this kind of organisms which were actually susceptible were included in this particular study, and it said that if my MIC was actually 0.5, then my treatment and mortality was much more than if it were 0.06. So the further away it is from your susceptible breakpoint, the likely chances that even if your bug is susceptible with respect to salmonella and to non-fermenting gram-negative bacilli, the treatment outcomes may differ. So that's something very important, because without an MIC, probably it would be difficult to really understand this and help optimize patient outcomes. Now, the next study is for Pseudomonas aeruginosa and cefepime. Here again, if you look at the CLSI breakpoints, it is the susceptible MIC breakpoint is below or equal to 8. But if you look at this particular graph, they looked into 30-day mortality of all patients who had an MIC between 0.5 to 8, which is still within the susceptible breakpoint. And look at this. At 6 and 8, they had very high mortalities, which again suggests that if you have MICs which are closer to your susceptible breakpoint, the likely chances of treatment failures are going to be more, the mortality is going to be more, versus the further away it is from your breakpoint. And again here they took 4 as the cutoff and found that if your MICs were less than 4, probably the survival was better, whereas if the MIC was more than 4, more than or equal to 4, the Kaplan-Meier curve shows here that the likely chances of mortality was much more higher. Now let's look at a gram-positive agent. Now this is the criteria, CLSI criteria for Staph aureus and vancomycin. So anything less than or equal to 2 is susceptible. 4 to 8 is intermediate, and more than 16 is resistant. And I'm showing you 2 papers here. The first one from 2008, which looked at MRSA bacteremias, and in fact they covered a period of almost 15 years from 1991 to 2005, and found that actually their numbers of MICs greater than 1 were increasing over a period of time. And they also found that the mortality was higher when your MIC was 2 versus when your MIC was lesser. Similarly, this is another study from 2006 which suggested that if your MICs were higher, more than 1 and 1.5 and 2, at 2 the treatment failure was almost about 50%. So that again is very, very important, and that's the reason why CLSI says please report vancomycin MICs, don't report it on zone diameters. Now, this is another systematic review and meta-analysis done almost about 6 years after the 2006 study, where once again the same thing has been mentioned, that both mortality and treatment failures are better if your MICs are less than 1.5. So you'd be on shaky grounds if your MIC for vancomycin is anything more than 1. To continue using that particular drug, or maybe in this situation vancomycin, for the treatment of for MRSAs. And this I would like to illustrate with the help of an example. This was in fact our case, a 60-year-old man who came to us with persistent high-grade fever. He had flown down from UAE, where he was earlier being treated for MRSA bacteremia. Here again, we started him on empiric vancomycin while all cultures were sent. And his first culture showed methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and the MIC was 0.5, less than or equal to 0.5. Now, meanwhile, while he was being treated with optimum doses of vancomycin, there were certain set of cardiac events. And it's very important with MRSAs to know where would the source be, MRSA bacteremia. Very important to identify the source and ensure source control happens. Now, in this situation, before we could identify the source and try and handle it and control it, unfortunately he had a series of cardiac events which did not really allow us to go in to do any kind of invasive procedure, and a time lapse of about 1 week happened while he was still into this vancomycin. And what happened subsequently, when he was actually taken up for surgery and with both blood cultures and specimens coming from his L3 L4 disc space where he had an abscess, both of them, the blood cultures at that time and the abscess, the pus specimen, the tissue specimen that had come to us grew the same methicillin resistant staph, but this time there was a change. The vancomycin MIC had become 1. So we saw a creep because this patient had been previously exposed to vancomycin. And secondly, we were now not on solid grounds to actually continue using vancomycin. So we had to change over this to high dose daptomycin, and subsequent to that his bacteremia came under control and we could demonstrate negative cultures. So these are not only things that, meaning CLSI or various studies mentioned, but if you observe on a day-to-day basis and discuss with your microbiology teams, I'm sure you will come across such instances where your MICs will actually help you identify better agents and better dosing strategies. So coming to our next question, which is basically where should MICs be reported? Again, I'm taking this information from CLSI, and CLSI says that most of the times polymyxins, whether it is for enterobacterales or for Pseudomonas acinetobacter, it should be reported in terms of MICs and not really any kind of zone diameters or things like that. For Salmonella, ufloxacin should be reported as MICs. And importance is all non-enterobacterales, like this. Under this comes your Pseudomonad species apart from Pseudomonas aeruginosa, Steno, Acinetobacter and Burkholderia. The remaining Pseudomonad species that come in should be reported only in MICs as micrograms per mil or milligrams per liter. Similarly, for Neisseria gonorrhoeae, azithromycin needs to be reported in MICs, and meningitis, both penicillins and levofloxacin should be reported in MICs. For the gram-positive drugs, Staph aureus and S. lugdunensis oxacillin reports needs to be reported as MICs. Otherwise, the glycopeptides, the lipoglycopeptides and daptomycin are common drugs which for most of the gram-positives need to be reported as MICs. Of importance is a common organism, Streptococcus pneumoniae, where penicillin, second, third, and fourth generation cephalosporins along with carbapenems need to be reported as MICs. And in fact, that further gets split up into meningitis and non-meningitis doses, and accordingly, it's very important to ensure that the report has this information and interpretation correctly. And of course, all anaerobes need to be reported as on the basis of MIC. So for these situations, you cannot report based on disk diffusion criteria. You have to give MIC. So for the rest of them, you may still use the disk diffusion criteria. So please note that while MIC is the in thing, the disk diffusion criteria still remains, and don't blame your lab if your laboratory is not reporting entirely all drugs on the basis of MICs. So disk diffusion is very much relevant. Now, let's look at the third question. Can drug doses be changed based on the MIC to optimize outcomes? This is a very common report, in fact, meaning I'm sure most people where, at least here in India, where both MDR and XDR pathogens are endemic, would be familiar with a report like this, where your Klebsiella or your Pseudomonas or Acinetobacter is actually resistant to almost everything, and what is susceptible is maybe colistin or maybe intermediate susceptible to one or the other carbapenem. So this is very, very common, and for the last almost about 8 to 10 years, the way we've been handling a problem like this is of this XDR pathogens is basically to combine them, and one of the backbone drugs is colistin along with a carbapenem. So let's look at how these two drugs can help us either singly or whether in combination to optimize patient outcomes. And I draw your attention to the recent changes that CLSI has made till 2019. In fact, CLSI did not have any breakpoints for colistin or polymyxin B for enterobacterales. Many of us, in fact, have Klebsiella as a very important pathogen in our ICUs, and it's an XDR pathogen. So we were left to actually use UCAST, which gave us breakpoints for colistin, and said that you extrapolate the same for polymyxin B. Whereas CLSI did give colistin polymyxin B for Pseudomonas and Acinetobacter. But in the last year, CLSI has made modifications, mainly because there's now more evidence available, both from the point of view of microbiology, PKPD, as well as clinical outcomes, to suggest interpretive criteria and MIC breakpoints for colistin and polymyxin B to enterobacterales. And as you see here, it is pretty much kind of harmonized. All of them, meaning colistin, polymyxin B to all these three kinds of bugs are either intermediate or resistant. They've not put in a susceptible category because they found that no MIC really had the could predict clinical efficacy, and that is the reason why we would now need to interpret, if using CLSI criteria, we would now need to interpret all MIC values less than or equal to 2 as intermediate, and there's no susceptible criteria. So what more about colistin? So in fact, CLSI has updated the actual drug dosages with the loading dose and the daily dose, and this, remember that this loading dose is not based on creatinine clearance or renal functions, but certainly the daily dose is. And based on this data, CLSI also noted that this PKPD data and clinical data is still having limited efficacy, and these polymyxins should be used in combination with other antimicrobial agents, and the loading dose should be given along with the maximal renal adjusted dose. So this is something important, and one cannot use these breakpoints for inhalation purpose, and when using IV poly B and colistin, they are unlikely to be effective against pneumonia. So it's best that they are combined or look at other agents instead of using colistin. Now let's look at a CRAB, which is a carbapenem resistant Acinetobacter, and see whether optimization with respect to colistin and using a carbapenem would really help. So when this group performed this the time kill curves to look at the bactericidal effects of colistin alone, meropenem alone, and the combination, please note that the colistin MICs are steady, 0.25 in all the three stains, but the MICs of meropenem are 4, 2, and 8. So with that, what did they find? They found that when they combined colistin and meropenem, it gave better kill, and which sustained over a period of time than any of these drugs when they were given individually. Now the same group also looked into combinations, and they found that, now this is very interesting, they took an Acinetobacter which was actually susceptible to meropenem, so meropenem MIC of 0.5, and here if you see what they did was the meropenem dose, if it was 0.5, was given at and half an hour. 1 and 2 gram doses were given at 3-hour infusions. Dr. Rahul already mentioned about modified strategies for infusions in his talk. So when they gave meropenem as 0.5 grams, it was not able to hold on. There was regrowth. Even at 1 gram, they found regrowth happening at 8 hours. But look at 2 grams, which is the red line. When they gave 2 grams at 3 hours, it was able to hold after 8 hours, the log reductions were significant and there was no regrowth that was seen. Now, this indicates that maybe those modifications are required even for susceptible strains, meaning your MDR organisms, particularly with Pseudomonas acinetobacter and maybe Klebsiella E. coli, which are known to cause healthcare associated infections. So you need to report both colistin and meropenem even in the susceptible MDR bugs as MICs. On the other hand, when the MIC of meropenem was 32 and 128, they found that no amount of colistin at 1 milligrams per liter or meropenem at 2 grams or 1 gram given 3-hour infusion really was able to hold on to preventing regrowth. So instead, they increased the colistin steady state to 2 milligrams per liter and gave 2 grams of meropenem, and they found that at 32 MIC, it was still synergistic and was able to prevent regrowth. So it's very important from this particular study, we know that even susceptible MICs might actually require dose modifications in terms of how we deliver the drug and what dose we are giving. And naturally, for resistant ones, the combination should ensure that you receive the colistin dosing is such that it is 2 milligrams per liter steady state can be achieved, and followed by a change in dosing as well as the strategy of administering the antimicrobial agent should be reviewed, and whatever best for T-half above MIC, at least for carbapenems, it's more than 40%, should be ensured if success is to be met with. Now, another article that looked into how MICs and dose modifications would help patient outcomes is when CLSI actually changed the breakpoints for Streptococcus pneumoniae with respect to the site of infection. So, if this is specifically for penicillin as well as ceftriaxone. So, if you have a non-meningitis isolate, the susceptibility breakpoint is actually 2. Whereas if it is a meningitis isolate, the susceptible breakpoint is less than 0.06, which is very a vast difference. And certainly for meningitis isolates, the penicillin dosing is 3 million units 4-hourly, or they say that ceftriaxone should be given at the maximal doses if your MIC is less than or equal to 0.5. Otherwise, higher doses should be given if whatever maximum tolerable doses should be given when it comes to dealing with ceftriaxone and a meningitis causing Streptococcus pneumoniae. So here again, we see that those modifications are required in order to ensure good patient outcomes. Now, coming to the next question of how do we really choose a drug based on MIC, and I'm sure this is a question that a lot of us many a times discuss, both microbiology as well as our clinical colleagues. So these are two terms that you could use, and there is literature available for both of them, which could help you select an appropriate antibiotic in when you face an MDR or an XDR bug. One is the MIC to breakpoint ratio, and the second one is the efficacy ratio. Now, what is MIC to breakpoint ratio? I'm sorry, this is not really working. The animations don't seem to be working, but let's go serially. Now, here I have collated 3 drugs, and I have put them across the range of the MIC dilutions that we normally do. And I have put in their breakpoints, both the susceptible as well as the resistant breakpoints. Now, the MIC to breakpoint quotient is actually the MIC of the isolate and the susceptible breakpoint ratio. So, if you look at these three, you see that the susceptible, whatever is the lowest value, becomes the best MIC to breakpoint quotient, or becomes the best antibiotic agent to be selected between these 3 antimicrobial agents. So here, in this case, it is C, which is 0.06. The MIC to breakpoint ratio is 0.06, and therefore C is probably a better agent to be used versus A and B. So if you look at this particular table, the further away to the left your MIC of the isolate is, the better it is. And if it is on the right side, further away, then it is worse in outcomes. Okay, so it's not a better drug. Sorry, not really worsen outcome, but not a better drug. So the further away to the left that your MIC isolate MIC is from the susceptible breakpoint, the better is the MIC to breakpoint quotient, and that drug should be preferred. So with respect to the MIC to breakpoint ratio, it is the lower values which are more useful than more useful. Now, the next terminology, which is the efficacy ratio, is the resistant breakpoint MIC to the isolate breakpoint MIC. So earlier we were using the susceptible breakpoint. Here it is a resistant breakpoint MIC. Again, I have taken the same table and I have put down the resistant breakpoint MICs and the MIC of the isolates. So if you see here, again, here the efficacy ratio, you consider the drug with a higher efficacy ratio to be more effective than the one with lower efficacy ratio. And in fact, this paper by Priyanka Sabu et al. Suggests that an efficacy ratio of more than or equal to 2, any antimicrobial agent with an efficacy of ratio of more than or equal to 2 might actually be useful as a monotherapy. But if the efficacy ratio is less than 2, then maybe you need to consider combination therapy. So that's how with these two methods, one can try and identify and pick up which antimicrobial agent will be better or better compared to other agents that are present. But this is not all, and Dr. Rahul also pointed out to these issues. One needs to take into consideration what is the site of infection, ensure that source control is properly done, ensure that your antimicrobial agent reaches that site in good amounts. So there's no point in giving tigecycline for a urinary tract infection because tigecycline is never going to reach there. Know your PK/PD issues like protein binding, excretion. There's no point in giving polymyxin B to a UTI because polymyxin also doesn't get excreted through the urine. Know your drug interactions because it may so happen that your drug under consideration may actually be inactivated by other drugs. And certainly if you have devices or plastics present within a patient, like we see in critically ill patients, and if the source is one of these plastics, you may not really be able to do away with the infection unless once again you have done source control with the help of these by removing these devices. So apart from just taking into consideration the MICs, it's very important to ensure that these factors are also taken into consideration whenever you are choosing an antimicrobial agent based on the MICs. So finally, the utility of MICs and breakpoints in managing patients is particularly important when we have rising antimicrobial resistance and fewer options to therapy in the form of new drugs. We're really not seeing them. So MICs and their breakpoints would help us with dose optimization to improve clinical outcomes, improve us in helping select best drugs from your DST report, and your MIC to breakpoint quotient and your efficacy ratio might help in deciding empiric therapy, might help in tracking rising MIC values, help in predicting antimicrobial resistance within your own institution, and thereby it would support antimicrobial stewardship programs, which are so important for us today with rising resistance and lesser and lesser drugs being available. So finally, I would like to conclude that clinical breakpoints are important and they have an important role in managing infections and bringing about better patient outcomes. And please ensure that you communicate with your laboratory and your microbiology team in order to get the best out of the MICs and breakpoints so that you can correct any or make any dose modifications or choose the right antimicrobial agents to treat your patients. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your patient hearing, and then I hand over to Dr.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. So this was a presentation given by Dr. Aruna Pujari ma'am. The presentation was very unique and very important, both from the microbiological aspect and from the clinical perspective also. Very rightly said, ma'am, that the standardization method should be followed and MIC value should be present when the reports go to the clinician, because that's the point where the clinician has to take a very vital and important decision in putting the specific antibiotic towards the patient. But it was also important because you have also mentioned about the MIC of the isolates divided by the susceptibility breakpoint ratio, and whichever the lowest value comes, that is one of the antibiotic which we need to choose when we are giving the antibiotic to the respective patients. During the presentation, you were also talking about the non-fermenters and the salmonella. You're saying that farther the MIC level, the clinical outcome may be affected. So in layman terms, if the MIC is on the left-hand side, it's far more better, but as the MIC increases and goes higher and higher, the clinical outcome may be a little bit of concern for the clinicians. So the examples of cefepime and Pseudomonas were given by you, as well as vancomycin. You were saying that, yes, if the MIC of vancomycin is less than 1, it typically gives us a far better clinical outcome rather than we going to a higher level. We were also talking about should the MICs, which are the drugs where the MIC should be reported. There was a list of multiple drugs which you said, for example, Enterobacteriaceae with polymyxins, Salmonella, we were talking about ofloxacin, Neisseria gonorrhea, we were talking about azithromycin, and so on, and for all the anaerobes as well. The most important part with this discussion was also that now CLSI has approved the Enterobacteriaceae pathogen along with Pseudomonas and aeruginosa for testing for the polymyxins, especially the colostine as well as the polymyxin B. The loading dose, which was a big challenge from the clinician's perspective for polymyxin B, has been also endorsed by the Infectious Disease Society of America or by their consensus guideline 2020, and even they also recommend that polymyxin B should be the drug of choice before we go for colostine, because it's an active drug as compared to the prodrug of colostine. Very rightly said, most of the doctors prefer the combination of polymyxins along with meropenem, and even research papers have shown good evidences by the clinical outcome. Here as well in your presentation, we have seen that the dosage of 2 grams of meropenem 3 times a day and 3-hour infusion has shown to be quite good clinical outcome as compared to what was routinely being used. So there are a lot of research articles on those papers as well. So thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful presentation.